There comes a moment in the life of every deeply feeling soul when the endless giving reaches its natural conclusion, when the vessel that has poured itself out countless times finally recognizes that it has been drinking from an empty well. This moment, though born of exhaustion and disillusionment, marks the beginning of the most profound transformation the human psyche can undergo. I have witnessed these metamorphoses in the depths of analytical work, in the dreams that visit those who stand at the threshold of their own becoming. The empathic individual in their awakened state becomes something the manipulative mind cannot comprehend or control. They cease to be the malleable clay that others have shaped according to their needs and desires. Instead, they become the sculptor of their own existence, wielding tools forged in the fire of their own suffering. This transformation is not merely psychological, it is alchemical, a fundamental transmutation of the soul's base metals into something approaching gold. You see, the empath's journey toward awakening follows what I have observed as the archetypal pattern of death and rebirth. The death is not physical, but rather the dissolution of the false self that has been constructed through years of adaptation to others' emotional climates. This false self, what we might call the adaptive persona, has learned to survive by becoming whatever others needed it to become. But survival and authentic living are not the same thing. The awakening begins when the empath encounters what I call the threshold of enough. This is not simply fatigue or temporary overwhelm, but a fundamental recognition that has bubbled up from the unconscious depths. It whispers with increasing urgency. This way of being is killing the essential self. The psyche, in its wisdom, begins to rebel against patterns that threaten the soul's integrity. Consider the profound shift that occurs when someone realizes that they have been living as an extension of others rather than as an autonomous being. The empathic person often discovers that they have become so attuned to external emotional frequencies that they have lost contact with their own inner voice. They have become like a radio constantly tuned to other stations, never broadcasting their own signal. This realization brings with it what Jung described as the activation of the opposite. Where once there was endless accommodation, now there emerges a fierce protectiveness of the self. Where once there was automatic yes-saying, now there develops the capacity for sacred refusal. This is not the ego's rebellion, but the soul's insistence on its right to exist authentically. The awakened empath becomes dangerous to those who have fed upon their accommodating nature, precisely because they can no longer be counted upon to absorb what others refuse to feel. They develop what we might term psychic immunity, an ability to recognize and deflect emotional projections that would once have been internalized as their own truth. In dreams, this transformation often appears as imagery of breaking free from underwater depths, gasping for air after nearly drowning. The dreamer realizes they have been submerged in an ocean of others' emotions, mistaking this submersion for love or duty. The movement toward the surface represents the soul's desperate reach for its own authentic breath, its own life force. The psychological mechanism at work here involves what I have identified as the integration of the shadow, those aspects of the self that have been deemed unacceptable by family systems, social conditioning, or personal belief structures. For many empaths, the shadow contains not cruelty or malice, but rather their own legitimate needs, the capacity for healthy selfishness, the right to say no without justification. This shadow integration is perhaps the most crucial aspect of the empath's awakening. They must reclaim not only their sensitivity as a gift rather than a burden, but also their capacity for self-protection, their ability to prioritize their own well-being, their willingness to disappoint others in service of their own truth. These qualities, which may have been labeled as selfish or unkind, reveal themselves to be essential elements of psychological wholeness. The awakened empath learns to distinguish between genuine intuition and anxiety-driven hypervigilance. They recognize that their heightened sensitivity, when properly understood and managed, becomes a sophisticated navigation system rather than a source of constant overwhelm. They learn to read energy not to immediately respond to every disturbance, but to make informed choices about where to direct their attention and care. This discernment represents a fundamental shift from unconscious reactivity to conscious choice. The empath no longer automatically moves toward every emotional crisis or need they encounter. Instead, they pause, assess, and choose their responses based on their own values and capacity, rather than on the urgency of others' demands. The transformation often begins with what appears to be withdrawal or coldness to those accustomed to the empath's previous availability. But this apparent coldness is actually the emergence of appropriate boundaries, psychological structures that allow the empath to engage authentically rather than compulsively. These boundaries are not walls built from fear, but rather membranes that permit genuine exchange while filtering out what is toxic or draining. In my analytical work, I have observed that this awakening process often triggers what we might call a relational sorting. Relationships that were built upon the empath's endless giving begin to reveal their true nature. Some relationships deepen as they shift toward genuine mutuality. Others sadly cannot survive the empath's refusal to remain in a one-sided dynamic of constant output without corresponding input. This sorting process, while painful, serves an essential function in the individuation journey. It reveals which connections were based on authentic care and which were sustained by emotional dependency or exploitation. The awakened empath learns to grieve the loss of relationships that cannot adapt to their newfound boundaries, while celebrating those that transform into something more genuine and nourishing. The emergence of the awakened empath also represents what I call the return of the exiled king or exiled queen, archetypal images that appear in many cultures' mythologies. This sovereign aspect of the self has been banished through conditioning that equated worth with service to others. The awakening involves recognizing that one can serve from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion. Dreams during this phase often feature imagery of thrones, crowns, or other symbols of rightful authority. The dreamer may find themselves in positions of power or leadership they had never imagined possible. These are not dreams of ego inflation, but rather the psyche's way of preparing the conscious mind for a new relationship with personal power and agency. The awakened empath's relationship with power differs fundamentally from the narcissistic approach to dominance and control. Where the narcissistic individual seeks power over others to compensate for inner emptiness, the awakened empath seeks power with others from a foundation of inner fullness. They become powerful not by diminishing others, but by refusing to diminish themselves. This authentic power manifests as an unshakable centeredness that others find both compelling and sometimes threatening. Those who have become accustomed to the empath's self-sacrifice may experience the newfound boundaries as rejection or abandonment. But the awakened empath learns to distinguish between others' discomfort with change and their own responsibility for others' emotional reactions. The process of awakening also involves what I term the reclamation of the inner life. The empath begins to turn their exceptional capacity for deep feeling inward, exploring their own emotional landscape with the same care and attention they once reserved exclusively for others. They discover that their inner world is vast, complex, and worthy of exploration. This inward turn is not narcissistic self-absorption, but rather the natural movement toward psychological wholeness. The empath learns to become their own primary relationship, developing an intimate and caring connection with their own thoughts, feelings, needs, and dreams. From this foundation of self-knowledge and self-care, they can then choose to engage with others from authenticity rather than from deficit. The awakened empath also develops what we might call emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel others' emotions without taking responsibility for them, to witness others' pain without immediately rushing to fix it, to care without carrying the weight of others' choices and consequences. This represents a mature form of empathy that serves others more effectively than codependent enabling ever could. In the realm of relationships, the awakened empath becomes a powerful catalyst for others' growth. Their refusal to enable unhealthy patterns forces those around them to confront their own responsibilities and capabilities. Some will rise to this challenge and develop greater emotional maturity. Others may retreat or seek new sources for the enabling they had grown accustomed to receiving. The awakened empath learns to see this relational disruption not as failure, but as a natural consequence of their own growth. They understand that their evolution inevitably affects the entire system of relationships they are part of. Some systems will adapt and grow stronger, others will resist change and may ultimately dissolve. Dreams during this phase often feature imagery of earthquakes, floods, or other natural disasters that clear away old structures to make room for new growth. The dreamer may initially feel frightened by this destruction, but gradually comes to understand it as necessary preparation for something better to emerge. The psychological concept of projection plays a crucial role in understanding the awakened empath's journey. For years, they may have carried the disowned emotions and unacknowledged needs of those around them. The awakening process involves recognizing these projections and returning them to their rightful owners, not in cruelty, but in clarity. This return of projections can feel threatening to those who have become dependent on the empath to carry what they cannot face within themselves. The awakened empath's refusal to continue serving as an emotional dumping ground forces others to develop their own capacity for emotional processing and self-regulation. The transformation also involves developing what I call strategic compassion, the ability to respond to others' needs from wisdom rather than from automatic reflex. The awakened empath learns to ask crucial questions before offering help. Is my assistance truly needed, or am I enabling dependency? Will my intervention support this person's growth or prevent them from developing their own capabilities? This strategic approach to compassion may initially feel cold or calculating to the empath, who has been conditioned to respond immediately to any sign of distress, but they gradually learn that thoughtful, boundaried compassion often serves others far better than impulsive rescue efforts that prevent natural learning and growth. The awakened empath also develops a sophisticated understanding of what I call energy management. They learn to recognize the difference between their own emotional states and those they absorb from their environment. They develop practices for clearing absorbed energy and maintaining their own energetic boundaries. This might involve literal physical practices like spending time in nature, engaging in creative expression, or pursuing solitary activities that allow them to reconnect with their own inner rhythm. It might also involve psychological practices like meditation, journaling, or therapy that help them maintain clarity about what belongs to them and what belongs to others. The emergence of the awakened empath often coincides with what appears to be a hardening or cooling toward those who have previously been able to manipulate their compassion. But this apparent hardness is actually the development of appropriate firmness, the capacity to remain caring while refusing to be consumed by others' chaos or drama. This firmness manifests as an ability to remain present with others' pain without immediately moving to alleviate it. The awakened empath learns that sometimes the most loving response is to allow others to experience the natural consequences of their choices, even when those consequences involve discomfort or struggle. In the realm of family dynamics, the awakened empath's transformation can be particularly challenging. Family systems often resist change, especially when that change threatens established roles and patterns. The empath may have served as the family's emotional regulator, the one who absorbs tension and maintains peace at the cost of their own well-being. When the empath awakens and begins to refuse this role, the family system may respond with increased pressure, guilt, or manipulation designed to restore the previous dynamic. The awakened empath must learn to remain firm in their boundaries while weathering these attempts to pull them back into old patterns. Dreams during this phase often feature imagery of leaving home, cutting cords, or being expelled from familiar places. These dreams reflect the psychological reality that awakening often requires leaving behind familiar but limiting identities in relationships, even when that leaving is painful. The awakened empath also develops what we might call intuitive discernment, the ability to distinguish between genuine calls for help and manipulative attempts to exploit their compassion. They learn to recognize the energy signature of those who seek to grow and heal versus those who seek to remain dependent and avoid responsibility. This discernment allows them to direct their care and attention toward those who will genuinely benefit from it, while protecting themselves from energy vampires and emotional parasites. They learn that their compassion is a precious resource that should be shared wisely, rather than scattered indiscriminately. The transformation process also involves developing a mature relationship with anger, an emotion that many empaths have been taught to fear or suppress. The awakened empath learns that anger can be a healthy response to boundary violations, and that expressing anger appropriately can actually strengthen relationships by establishing clear limits and expectations. This healthy relationship with anger allows the awakened empath to communicate their needs and limits directly rather than through passive-aggressive withdrawal or martyred silence. They learn that conflict, when handled skillfully, can lead to greater intimacy and understanding rather than destruction. The awakened empath's relationship with their own sensitivity also undergoes fundamental transformation. Where once their emotional sensitivity may have felt like a burden or a weakness, they come to understand it as a sophisticated information-gathering system that, when properly managed, provides invaluable insights into themselves and others. They learn to see their emotional responses as data rather than directives, information to be considered and processed rather than impulses to be immediately acted upon. This allows them to maintain their empathic gifts while developing the emotional regulation skills necessary to navigate complex social and professional environments. The process of awakening also involves what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold tension between opposites and find creative solutions that honor multiple perspectives. The awakened empath learns to hold both compassion and firmness, both openness and boundaries, both care for others and care for themselves. This capacity for holding paradox allows them to navigate relationships with greater sophistication and nuance. They no longer feel compelled to choose between being loving or being boundaried, between caring for others or caring for themselves. Instead, they find ways to honor multiple values simultaneously. In the workplace, the awakened empath often experiences significant shifts in their professional relationships and career trajectory. They may find themselves less willing to absorb the stress and dysfunction of poorly managed organizations. They may become more selective about the projects and colleagues they engage with, prioritizing environments that respect their well-being and value their contributions. This professional awakening may lead to career changes, entrepreneurial ventures, or shifts toward work that allows greater autonomy and alignment with their values. The awakened empath often discovers that their sensitivity, when properly channeled, becomes a significant professional asset rather than a liability. The transformation also affects the awakened empath's relationship with service and contribution. Where once they may have given compulsively out of fear or conditioning, they now choose how to serve from a place of fullness and clarity. Their contributions become more effective because they flow from authentic choice rather than unconscious compulsion. This conscious approach to service allows the awakened empath to sustain their contributions over time, rather than burning out from excessive giving. They learn to serve in ways that energize rather than deplete them, finding the sweet spot where their natural gifts align with genuine need and appreciation. The awakened empath also develops what we might call energetic authenticity, the ability to show up in relationships and situations as their genuine self rather than as who they think others need them to be. This authenticity has a powerful impact on those around them, often inspiring others to examine their own masks and facades. This authentic presence can be threatening to those who are heavily invested in maintaining illusions or avoiding difficult truths. The awakened empath's refusal to participate in collective denial or emotional bypassing forces others to confront realities they might prefer to ignore. In romantic relationships, the awakened empath's transformation often leads to either deeper intimacy or the end of relationships that were built upon unhealthy dynamics. Partners who are capable of growth may be inspired by the empath's evolution and choose to develop greater emotional maturity themselves. Others may resist the change and seek to manipulate the empath back into previous patterns. The awakened empath learns to see these relationship challenges as opportunities for both parties to grow, rather than as problems to be solved through accommodation or self-sacrifice. They become willing to lose relationships that cannot evolve, rather than diminishing themselves to maintain connections that no longer serve anyone's highest good. Dreams during this relational sorting phase often feature imagery of bridges collapsing or paths diverging. The dreamer may feel sadness about these separations while simultaneously feeling relief and freedom. These dreams reflect the psyche's understanding that some relationships must end for authentic growth to continue. The awakened empath also develops a sophisticated understanding of what constitutes genuine reciprocity in relationships. They learn to recognize the difference between relationships, where energy flows both ways, and those where they are consistently the primary giver. They become willing to invest their energy where it is matched and appreciated, rather than where it is taken for granted or exploited. This understanding of reciprocity helps them build healthier relationship patterns going forward. They attract and choose partners, friends, and colleagues who are capable of genuine mutuality rather than those who seek to recreate the old dynamic of one-sided giving. The transformation process also involves developing what I call conscious boundaries, limits that are set not from fear or defensiveness, but from self-respect and clarity about what serves the highest good of all involved. These boundaries are flexible rather than rigid, but they are non-negotiable when it comes to protecting the empath's essential well-being. The awakened empath learns to communicate these boundaries clearly and kindly, but they also learn that they don't need others' permission or understanding to maintain them. They develop the capacity to remain firm in their limits even when others respond with guilt, manipulation, or anger. The psychological concept of individuation is central to understanding the awakened empath's journey. This process involves becoming conscious of and integrating previously unconscious aspects of the personality, developing a mature relationship with both light and shadow elements of the self. For the awakened empath, individuation often means reclaiming disowned aspects of assertiveness, self-interest, and personal power while maintaining the natural gifts of sensitivity and compassion. This integration creates a more complete and effective human being rather than someone who is lopsidedly developed in one direction. The awakened empath also learns to distinguish between healing and enabling in their relationships with others. They recognize that true healing requires the other person's active participation and willingness to change, and that their role is to support others' growth rather than to do the work for them. This understanding prevents them from falling into the trap of trying to heal or save others who are not genuinely committed to their own transformation. They learn to offer support and encouragement while allowing others to face the consequences of their choices and develop their own strength and capabilities. In the later stages of awakening, the empath often develops what we might call compassionate detachment, the ability to care deeply while remaining emotionally unentangled from others' dramas and crises. This allows them to respond to others' needs from wisdom rather than from emotional reactivity. This compassionate detachment is not coldness or indifference, but rather a mature form of love that respects others' autonomy and capacity for growth. The awakened empath learns that sometimes the most loving thing they can do is to step back and allow others to develop their own resources and resilience. The transformation also involves developing a healthy relationship with solitude and introspection. The awakened empath learns to value and protect time alone as essential for processing their experiences, connecting with their inner wisdom, and maintaining the energetic equilibrium. This comfort with solitude allows them to choose relationships and social interactions from desire rather than from fear of being alone. They no longer tolerate poor treatment or draining dynamics simply to avoid isolation, because they have learned that quality solitude is preferable to toxic company. The awakened empath often discovers that their journey of transformation serves not only their own healing, but also contributes to the collective healing of humanity. By refusing to enable dysfunction and modeling healthy boundaries and authentic living, they create ripple effects that inspire others to examine their own patterns and choices. This larger sense of purpose helps sustain the awakened empath through the challenges of transformation. They understand that their healing is not just personal, but transpersonal, contributing to the evolution of human consciousness and the development of healthier relational patterns in families, communities, and society. The final stage of the awakened empath's transformation involves what Jung called the return, bringing the gifts and wisdom gained through the individuation process back into service to the collective. But this return is fundamentally different from their previous giving because it flows from fullness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion. The awakened empath becomes a powerful force for healing and transformation in the world, but they do so while maintaining their boundaries and protecting their well-being. They serve others from their overflow rather than from their essential reserves, ensuring that their contributions are sustainable and life-giving rather than depleting. This sustainable approach to service allows the awakened empath to make lasting contributions to the healing of the world, while modeling for others what healthy empathy and conscious compassion look like in practice. They become teachers and guides not through preaching, but through living examples of what becomes possible when sensitivity is balanced with strength, when compassion is wedded to wisdom. The awakened empath's journey from unconscious absorption to conscious choice represents one of the most profound transformations the human psyche can undergo. It is a journey from fragmentation to wholeness, from reactivity to authenticity, from depletion to fullness. And in this transformation, both the empath and all those whose lives they touch are forever changed. For those who recognize themselves in this description, know that your sensitivity is not a curse to be overcome, but a gift to be honored and developed. Your journey toward awakening serves not only your own healing, but contributes to the healing of our wounded world. Trust the process, honor your boundaries, and remember that in learning to love yourself with the same fierce tenderness you have always shown others, you become a beacon of what is possible for all human beings. Your awakening is not just personal. It is part of the larger awakening of human consciousness itself. And in this greater context, every step you take toward wholeness and authenticity is a gift to the world.